October 14, 1972. Whitfield Repertory Theater, Philadelphia, 8 o'clock in the evening. Coat check attendant Dorothea Millicent Hargrove stands at the familiar rack, the same one where she stood for 30 years. Her hands, worn and veined from decades of work, move automatically through the numbered tags. Tonight's dress rehearsal of __quote_0___ ran late, and the company is finally leaving. Actors emerge from the rehearsal hall exhausted, irritable. Young director Fletcher Ashford strides ahead of everyone, talking loudly, gesturing with his expensive imported cigarette holder. He's 29 years old, wearing an overcoat his father brought back from London. Dark cashmere, impeccably tailored, the kind that costs more than Dorothea earns in 6 months. He approaches the coat check, extends his brass tag without looking at her. Dorothea takes it silently, finds the coat among the hundreds hanging there, hands it over with the practiced efficiency of 3 decades. Fletcher grabs the coat, but suddenly stops mid-motion. Turns to face the group of actors behind him. There's Evangeline Pemberton with her elegant silk scarf, Randolph Whitmore still in his rehearsal makeup, Constance Fairchild clutching her script, 5 others whose faces show exhaustion and hunger. Everyone waits silently, tired, wanting their coats, wanting to go home to their families and their dinners. The hallway smells of old wood, stage makeup, and the faint tobacco smoke that clings to everything in 1972. And then, Fletcher Ashford smiles broadly, theatrically, the way he smiles when he's about to deliver what he thinks is a devastating line. He speaks loudly so everyone can hear, his voice carrying that patrician Philadelphia accent he's cultivated since Yale. __quote_1__. He points directly at Dorothea Millicent Hargrove with his cigarette holder, the gesture theatrical and cruel. Quote, 2. He laughs, a sound without warmth. Quote, 3. Dorothea Millicent Hargrove stands motionless. Her face remains calm, as always. 49 years of life have taught her not to show emotion. Not when her parents died, not when men returned from war missing limbs and memories, not when the theater nearly closed during the Depression. Not now. She slowly, very slowly, hands Fletcher Ashford his coat. Looks him directly in the eyes. His are brown, bloodshot from late nights and too much bourbon, arrogant with the confidence of someone who's never truly been denied anything. Her eyes are gray, steady, revealing nothing. Silently, simply hands over the coat and says nothing. Not a word, not a sound. Evangeline Pemberton freezes with her brass tag clutched in her manicured hand. Her beautiful face, the one that's graced countless playbills, goes pale beneath the rouge. Randolph Whitmore drops his gaze to the worn linoleum floor, suddenly finding the scuff marks fascinating. Constance Fairchild opens her mouth to say something. Her lips form the shape of a word, perhaps quote 4, or perhaps quote 5, but no sound emerges. The entire company stands in the paralysis of complicity, painfully, awkwardly, shamefully silent. The clock on the wall ticks. Someone's stomach growls. Outside on Walnut Street, a car horn blares. But in this hallway, only silence. Fletcher Ashford laughs even louder, emboldened by the lack of opposition. Exactly. That's exactly how she reacts. Not at all. Complete emptiness. How does she even live with a face like that? Does she go home and just stand in a corner like furniture? He puts on his coat with theatrical flourishes, buttons it up slowly, still chuckling at his own wit. All right, people. Tomorrow at 10 sharp for rehearsal. Don't be late. We have 3 weeks until opening, and this production needs to be perfect. Otherwise, you might catch this old bat's pessimism and start sleepwalking through your performances. He adjusts his scarf, cashmere like everything else he owns, and turns to walk away, his laughter echoing down the corridor for a long time, bouncing off the high ceilings with their peeling paint and water stains from the leak that maintenance never quite fixes. The company stands in complete silence for 30 seconds that feel like 30 minutes. No one moves. Evangeline's hand trembles slightly. Randolph's jaw is clenched so tight a muscle jumps in his cheek. Constance has tears in her eyes, but doesn't let them fall. Then, slowly, one by one, moving like people underwater, the actors approach Dorothea for their coats. They hand over their tags. They take their belongings silently, without meeting her eyes, without acknowledging what just happened. They leave through the stage door into the October night. No one says a word. No one apologizes. No one says __quote _8 ___. No one defends her. They just leave. Dorothea Millicent Hargrove remains alone in the coat check room. She stands by the racks with their empty hangers now swaying slightly from recent use. She stares into empty space, at the wall where actors' photographs hang, black and white images of people who've played this stage, some dead now, some famous, some forgotten. 30 years. 10,950 days of work. 30 years of coming to this building 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when there are matinees. 30 years of arriving at noon and leaving at midnight. 30 years of standing at these racks, taking coats, giving tags, remembering faces, remembering names, remembering which actress prefers her coat warmed by the radiator and which actor always loses his tag and needs the spare. For 30 years, she's been part of this theater, invisible, silent, unnoticed, taken for granted. She's handed coats to great actors, Tony Award winners, directors with international reputations, visiting celebrities who came backstage after opening nights. She's watched legendary productions being born, the 1954 Death of a Salesman that made grown men weep, the 1963 Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf that shocked Philadelphia society, the 1969 Hair that brought protesters to the doors. She's heard secrets, confessions, revelations whispered by people who forgot she had ears. She's been a witness to this theater's history, its triumphs and its scandals, its brilliance and its pettiness. But to Fletcher Ashford, she's an ancient bat. Nothing. A statue. Death itself. Something to mock for cheap laughs. Dorothea slowly removes her work smock, gray cotton, laundered so many times the fabric is soft as paper, with her name embroidered in fading blue thread on the pocket. She hangs it on the designated hook, smooths it with her worn hands. She puts on her old coat, black wool, purchased at Wanamaker's in 1958, with signs of multiple repairs where she's restitched the lining and replaced buttons. Picks up her handbag, imitation leather, containing her house key, a crocheted handkerchief, the notebook she always carries, 73 cents in change, and a library card for the Free Library of Philadelphia. Turns off the lights in the coat check room. The switch makes its familiar click, locks the door with the key they gave her in 1942, the same key she's carried for 3 decades. Exits the theater through the stage door, the one that leads to the alley where the garbage bins are kept. She walks through October Philadelphia. Market Street is dark and cold. The streetlights create pools of yellow illumination that make the shadows between them seem blacker. Wind from the Delaware River cuts through the city streets, sharp as a razor, cutting to the bone even through her coat. It smells of river water, automobile exhaust, roasting chestnuts from a cart on the corner, and the peculiar smell of autumn in the city, dead leaves mixed with concrete dust and rain. Occasional passers-by hurry about their business, a couple arguing about where to eat dinner, a businessman with a briefcase rushing to catch the train to the main line, a group of young people laughing about something, their breath visible in the cold air. Dorothea walks slowly, methodically, her sensible shoes making soft clicks on the pavement. She's thinking, remembering. She remembers overhearing Fletcher Beaumont's conversation with that New York director, Montgomery Stapleton, back in June. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 3:15. She'd been reorganizing the storage closet in the back of the coat check room, inventorying the lost items that accumulated, Forgotten scarves, mismatched gloves, a single earring, a book of poetry. She heard voices. Fletcher and Montgomery standing near the coat racks, thinking they were alone. Fletcher's voice, smooth and persuasive. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 13, underscore, underscore. Montgomery's hesitation, palpable even in his silence. Then, I don't know, Fletch, that's my work. I spent a year developing that interpretation. It's my vision of Williams. Fletcher's laugh, dismissive. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 15, underscore, underscore, underscore. A long pause. Then, Montgomery, defeated. Fletcher's voice, hard now. No one will find out. Who's going to tell? You? I trust you, Monty. We're friends. We went to Yale together. We're in this together. The sound of hands shaking. The sound of a man selling his artistic soul for $3,000 because he had no other choice. She remembers the overheard phone conversation between Fletcher and his mistress Celestine Blackwood in September. It was late, past 10:30 at night, after a rehearsal that ran long. Everyone had gone except Fletcher, who was using the phone in the hallway just outside the coat check room. She was doing the evening tally, counting tags, making sure everything balanced. His voice, raised in anger, carrying easily through the thin walls. Celestine, I told you, I'm not leaving Margaret. She's the daughter of Federal Judge Harrison Whitmore, for Christ's sake. Do you think I'm going to throw away that connection for you and some bastard child? Her father has connections from here to Washington. Get rid of it. I don't care how. Find a doctor, take care of it, and never mention it to me again. If you try to make this public, if you even think about it, I swear to God I'll destroy you. I have lawyers. I have money. I have connections all over Philadelphia. You have nothing. You're a costume designer at a regional theater. You have nothing. Remember that. The sound of the phone being slammed down so hard the bell inside it rang. Then Fletcher's footsteps, walking away, still muttering curses under his breath. She remembers March 1971, when Fletcher, newly arrived at the theater and full of swagger, was telling a friend in the coat check room, thinking no one was there because it was a Sunday, and Dorothea always went to inventory the storage closet on Sunday afternoons. She'd been in the back, cataloging, when she heard them come in. Fletcher's voice, boastful, quote, she remembers all of it, written down in her notebooks. Dates, facts, quotes, times, details. She's been writing it all down for 30 years, not just about Fletcher, about everyone. Every conversation she's overheard, every secret she's witnessed, every scandal she's seen. Hundreds of pages in a dozen notebooks stored in a locked trunk under her bed in her apartment on Pine Street. She didn't know why she did this for all those years. It was just something she felt compelled to do. Document, record, remember. Invisible people see everything, and she saw everything, and she wrote it all down. And now, walking through dark Philadelphia, past the closed shops and the dimly lit windows of apartments where families are eating dinner and watching television, Dorothea Millicent Hargrove knows with absolute certainty what she's going to do. Within a year, Fletcher Beaumont Ashford will leave this theater. He won't leave triumphant. He won't leave for a better position. He'll leave destroyed. Because she remembers everything. She has evidence of everything. And she's done staying silent. For 30 years, she's been invisible. For 30 years, she's witnessed injustice and cruelty and corruption and said nothing. But no more. Fletcher Beaumont Ashford made a catastrophic mistake tonight. He assumed that because she was invisible, she was powerless. He assumed that because she was silent, she had nothing to say. He was wrong, profoundly wrong. Invisible people see everything, and sometimes, when pushed far enough, invisible people act. Dorothea Millicent Hargrove came to the theater on October 23, 1942. She was 19 years old, young, thin from rationing, frightened of the future. America was deep into World War II. Young men were dying in North Africa and the Pacific. Philadelphia factories ran 24 hours making weapons and vehicles. The city lived under the constant anxiety of casualty lists and war news. Her parents, Father Clement Josiah Hargrove, a skilled machinist at the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and Mother Winifred Louise, a laundress who took in washing from wealthy families on the main line, had died within months of each other in late 1941 and early 1942. Her father succumbed to pneumonia in December 1941, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, in a charity hospital bed with only Dorothea holding his hand. Her mother followed in March 1942, tuberculosis taking her slowly and painfully in the same cramped boarding house room on Spruce Street where they'd lived since the Depression forced them from their home. Dorothea was left completely alone in the world. No siblings, she'd been an only child, a late-life baby born when her mother was 43. No aunts or uncles. Her father had been estranged from his family back in Delaware, and her mother's people were all dead or disappeared into the anonymous poverty of the Depression. Just alone. 19 years old and alone. She worked at Baldwin Locomotive in the riveting department, making parts for Sherman tanks that would roll off to Europe to fight Nazis. The work was hard. 10-hour shifts in a cavernous factory filled with noise so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. Hot metal and sparks flying, the constant danger of industrial accidents. The pay was 42 cents an hour, which sounds like money, but bought less and less every month as inflation ate away at wages. After rent for her boarding house room, after food, after car fare on the trolley to get to the factory in Eddystone, she had almost nothing left. She was slowly starving on 42 cents an hour. Her clothes were wearing out. She was developing a cough from the metal dust in the factory. She was 19 years old and dying slowly. In October 1942, a friend from the factory, Mabel Thornton, a woman of 30 who'd been kind to the quiet orphan girl on the riveting line, came to her during lunch break. They were sitting on the factory floor, eating sandwiches made from rationed bread and mysterious meat that might have been Spam. Mabel said, "Dottie, I heard something you should know. My cousin works at the Whitfield Repertory Theater. You know it? On Walnut Street? They're looking for a coat check girl. The previous one quit to join the WACs. They pay 50 cents an hour, 8 cents more than here, and you get lunch once a day, real lunch, whatever the actors eat. Better than this." She gestured at their sorry sandwiches. "You should try for it. You're smart, you're clean, you're quiet. They'd hire you." Dorothea looked at Mabel with surprise. "Me? I've never worked in a theater. I don't know anything about theater." Mabel laughed. "You don't need to know anything. You just take people's coats and give them back. A trained monkey could do it. But they want someone trustworthy, someone who won't steal from the pockets. You're honest. Go tomorrow. They're interviewing at 2 o'clock. The next day, Dorothea asked for 2 hours off from her shift supervisor, a mean-faced man named Kowalski, who grudgingly agreed because labor was scarce with all the young men at war. She took the trolley into Center City, got off at Broad Street, walked to Walnut, found the Whitfield Repertory Theater. The building was beautiful in a faded way, built in 1898 in the Beaux-Arts style, all columns and carved stone and ornate details that spoke of an era when theater was high culture and Philadelphia was a cultural capital. But now, in 1942, it showed its age. The stone was dirty from decades of coal smoke. The marquee had missing letters. Sandbags were stacked outside for air raid protection. Philadelphia wasn't being bombed, but everyone was paranoid after Pearl Harbor. Inside, it was cold. Coal rationing meant minimal heating. The lobby was dim, electricity was conserved. But there was still grandeur there, under the shabbiness. High ceilings with peeling gilt paint, a grand staircase with worn red carpet, crystal chandeliers that probably hadn't been lit in years. Dorothea climbed to the 3rd floor, following the signs to the administrative offices. Her footsteps echoed on the marble stairs. She found a door marked Artistic Director, Harrison A. Pendleton, and knocked softly. A tired voice said, "Come in." Behind an enormous oak desk sat a man of about 55, thin as a rail from wartime rationing, with deep-set eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and graying temples. This was Harrison Archibald Pendleton. She'd learn later that he was one of the founders of the group theater in the 1930s, a disciple of Stanislavski's method, a man who'd studied in Moscow and brought European theatrical techniques to America. He'd been directing Ibsen and O'Neill and Chekhov since before the Great War. He'd seen theater change from Victorian melodrama to modern realism. He was a legend, though she didn't know that then. "You're here about the coat check position?" he asked, looking at her with those deep-set eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. His voice was quiet, cultured, weary. The voice of someone who'd been disappointed by the world too many times. Dorothea nodded, suddenly aware of how shabby she must look in her factory clothes, her hands still dirty from metalwork, her hair hastily combed in the theater bathroom. __quote_27__. Harrison Archibald Pendleton stood slowly, as if his joints hurt, walked around the desk, approached her. He studied her carefully, not in a threatening way, but analytically, the way a director studies an actor. Quote 28, quote 29, quote 30, quote 31, quote 32, quote 33. Something flickered in his eyes, sympathy, recognition. Dorothea hesitated. She could lie, make up something about loving theater, about wanting to be part of the arts. But she looked at his eyes and knew he'd see through any lie, so she told the truth. "Better pay, sir. And the lunch. I'm barely getting by on factory wages." Harrison Archibald Pendleton smiled sadly, the first real expression she'd seen on his face. He returned to his desk, pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Paper was rationed too, but he used it anyway, and began writing with a fountain pen. $15 a week, nearly double what she made at Baldwin. Dorothea felt something like hope for the first time in months. Harrison Archibald Pendleton signed the paper with a flourish, handed it to her. Dorothea took the paper with trembling hands, started to leave, grateful beyond words. But Harrison Archibald Pendleton stopped her with a raised hand. She turned around, confused. Harrison Archibald Pendleton looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes. He said slowly, carefully, enunciating each word as if teaching her a new language. Dorothea stood silent, absorbing this. Then she nodded slowly. Harrison Archibald Pendleton said. Dorothea looked at him, not fully comprehending, but sensing something important in his words. Harrison Archibald Pendleton smiled that sad smile again. __quote_49__. The next day, October 24, 1942, Dorothea Millicent Hargrove began her career at the Whitfield Repertory Theater. Gertrude Ophelia Hawkins, the senior coat check attendant, was waiting for her. Gertrude was a woman of about 60, tall and dignified, once heavy but now thin from wartime rationing, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. She showed Dorothea the coat check room, a long, narrow space with 12-foot ceilings, wooden racks with numbered hooks running along both walls, a small desk in the corner with a stool, worn black and white linoleum on the floor that was probably installed in 1898 and never replaced. __quote_50__. Gertrude explained in a voice that suggested decades of dealing with the public, pointing to numbered brass discs hanging on hooks on the wall. Each disc had a number stamped into it, 1 through 200. Quote, 51. Quote, 52. Quote, 53. Quote, 54. Quote, 55. Gertrude's voice became serious. There are rules for this job, and they're not written down anywhere, but they're absolute. Rule 1. Never argue with patrons. They can be rude, they can be drunk, they can accuse you of losing their things, they can call you names. You stay quiet and polite. Smile. Apologize even when it's not your fault, because they're paying customers and you're just the coat check girl. Clear? Clear, ma'am. Rule 2. Never, ever steal from the pockets. Not a nickel, not a piece of jewelry, not a scarf left in a sleeve. They will test you. Rich ladies will leave a dollar bill in their coat pocket to see if it's still there after the show. If you're caught stealing, you'll be fired and blacklisted from every theater in Philadelphia. Understood? Understood, ma'am. I wouldn't steal anyway. Good. I didn't think you would, but I had to say it. Rule 3. This is the most important one, so listen carefully. Gertrude lowered her voice, glanced toward the door to make sure no one was listening. If you hear things, conversations, arguments, secrets that actors or directors or patrons say around you, you keep it to yourself. You never gossip. You never tell anyone what you've heard. In a theater, there are always scandals brewing, affairs happening, rivalries burning. But that's not your concern. You're here to check coats, period. The theater is full of people who talk too much. You be the one who talks too little. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. I can keep secrets. Gertrude studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you can. You have an honest face, Miss Hargrove. That's rare. All right, let's practice. I'll be a patron, you check my coat. For the next hour, Gertrude taught her the mechanics. How to quickly identify which coat belonged to which number. How to arrange them so frequently worn coats were easier to reach. How to handle difficult patrons. How to keep track of lost items. How to manage the chaos when 200 people all wanted their coats at once after a show. By the end, Dorothea's head was spinning with information, but she understood the basics. That evening, the theater staged Quote 64 by Thornton Wilder. Patrons began arriving at 7:30. Dorothea stood at her station, nervous, while Gertrude supervised. The patrons came in, wealthy women in fur coats despite the rationing, men in business suits and fedoras, younger couples dressed more modestly. They handed over their belongings, took their tags, went to the auditorium. Most didn't even look at Dorothea's face. They looked at her hands as she took their coats. They looked at the tags she gave them, but they didn't look at her. She was already invisible. But she saw everything. She saw which women wore real diamonds and which wore paste imitations. She saw which men smelled of whiskey before the show even started. She saw young couples sneak quick kisses when they thought no one was watching. She saw an older man slip a note to an actress heading backstage. She saw it all. After the show, patrons returned for their coats. The chaos Gertrude had warned about materialized. 200 people crowding the coat check, waving tags, demanding their belongings immediately. But Dorothea kept calm, found each coat quickly, handed them over with a polite, "Good evening." Some people said thank you, though most said nothing. One elderly woman gave her a quarter tip. One businessman complained his coat wasn't warm enough from hanging in the cold room and glared at her as if it were her fault. When the last patron left, Gertrude smiled at her. Quote 67 __. It wasn't clear if that was a compliment, but Dorothea took it as one. In November 1942, the theater staged Our Town by Thornton Wilder. It was a huge success despite the war. Audiences packed the house every night, desperate for escape from the grim news on the radio. After one performance, Harrison Archibald Pendleton came to the coat check room. "Miss Hargrove," he said, "how are you settling in?" "Fine, Mr. Pendleton." "Good. I'm glad." He paused, studying her with those deep, knowing eyes. "You're doing well. You're quiet, efficient, professional. That's exactly what we need. Tell me, Miss Hargrove, have you noticed anything interesting during your time here?" Dorothea understood immediately what he meant, but she remembered Gertrude's warning about gossip. Harrison Archibald Pendleton smiled, a genuine smile this time. In December 1942, she witnessed her first theater scandal. A visiting actress from New York, someone famous whose name she was told to never repeat, was caught in a dressing room with the theater's married leading man. The actress's husband stormed backstage, threatened lawsuits, caused a scene that ended with police being called. Dorothea saw it all from her coat check station. The shouting, the tears, the accusations. The other staff gossiped for weeks. Dorothea said nothing, wrote it down in her notebook, dates, times, names, but told no one. By spring 1943, she'd become truly invisible. Patrons no longer even glanced at her face. Actors walked past her coat check dozens of times without acknowledging her existence. She was part of the architecture, like the marble columns or the worn carpet. And she realized Harrison Pendleton had been right. Invisibility was power. She heard everything. The affairs, the rivalries, the schemes, the fears. All of it, documented in her growing collection of notebooks. In 1944, a young soldier on leave came to see the Glass Menagerie. He was missing his left arm, the sleeve of his uniform pinned up. When he handed Dorothea his coat with his remaining hand, she saw his face. He couldn't have been older than 22, but his eyes looked ancient. After the show, when she returned his coat, he said, quote 77, and actually looked at her. Really looked. Perhaps the first patron in 2 years to truly see her face. Quote 78, quote, she said. Quote 79, quote. He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. Quote 80, quote. Dorothea looked at this boy who'd given his arm for his country and was asking her, a coat check girl, for hope. Yes, she said firmly. Things will get better. They always do, eventually. You just have to be patient. He smiled, a real smile that reached those ancient eyes. Thank you, he said again. Then he left. She never saw him again. But she remembered him, wrote about him in her notebook that night. Proof that even invisible people could matter to someone, if only for a moment. The years rolled forward. 1943, 1944, 1945. The war continued, then ended. Young men came home, some whole, some broken. The theater survived. The Whitfield staged Rodgers and Hammerstein, Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams. New actors arrived, old ones retired or died. Directors came and went. But Dorothea remained, always at the coat check, always invisible, always watching. She developed habits. Every night after work, she returned to her apartment. She'd moved from the boarding house to a small studio apartment on Pine Street in 1945 when she'd saved enough money. The apartment was modest. One room with a Murphy bed, a tiny kitchenette, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a single window overlooking an alley. But it was hers. And every night, she sat at her small desk and wrote in her notebook. She wrote down what she'd seen that day. Not gossip, not judgment, just facts. Quote 84, quote 85, quote 86. She wrote it all down. Dates, times, names, quotes. Dozens of notebooks filled with observations. She stored them in a locked trunk under her Murphy bed. She didn't know exactly why she did this. It was compulsive, almost obsessive, but it felt important to document, to remember, to create a record. Because she was invisible, and invisible people are the only ones who see the whole truth. The decades passed. The 1950s brought McCarthyism and paranoia. She watched actors accused of communist sympathies lose their jobs, blacklisted based on rumor and innuendo. The 1960s brought social revolution. She watched the theater stage controversial plays about race and sexuality and war that would have been impossible 20 years earlier. She watched the world change while she remained constant, unchanging, always at her coat rack. In 1956, Gertrude Hawkins retired at age 74. On her last day, she called Dorothea into the storage closet and spoke to her privately. Miss Hargrove, I'm leaving this position to you. You've been the junior attendant for 14 years. Now you'll be senior. Train whoever they hire to replace you, just like I trained you. But remember what I told you on your first day. Keep secrets, never gossip, be invisible. Can you promise me that? "I promise, Mrs. Hawkins." Gertrude smiled. "I know you will. You're the best invisible person I've ever met. That's the highest compliment I can give you in this job." She handed Dorothea a small wrapped package. "Open it after I leave." After Gertrude left the theater for the last time, Dorothea opened the package. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, expensive, beautiful. On the first page, Gertrude had written in elegant script, "For Dorothea Hargrove, who sees everything and says nothing. Keep recording the truth. Someone needs to remember. G.H. 1956. Dorothea became senior coat check attendant at age 33. She trained a series of junior attendants over the years. Young women who came and went, most lasting only a few months before moving on to marriage or other jobs or better opportunities. None of them stayed like she did. None of them understood the value of invisibility like she did. By 1971, Dorothea had been at the Whitfield for 29 years. She was 50 years old, unmarried, childless, living alone in her studio apartment with her books and her notebooks and her quiet life. She'd watched thousands of performances, checked tens of thousands of coats, witnessed countless human dramas. She'd become a fixture at the theater. The older staff members knew her name. The newer ones just knew she'd always been there. She was part of the building's architecture, like the staircase or the chandelier. And then, in March 1971, Fletcher Ashford arrived. He came from Yale Drama School with excellent recommendations and a powerful father. Beaumont Sterling Ashford was a prominent attorney in Philadelphia, connected to judges and politicians and money. Fletcher had charm, intelligence, talent, ambition, and the absolute confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything. The Whitfield's board of directors hired him as a junior director with the understanding he'd eventually become artistic director when Harrison Pendleton retired. Dorothea watched him from her coat check station. Fletcher was 28 years old, handsome in that patrician wasp way, tall, lean, strong jaw, brown hair perfectly styled, expensive clothes perfectly tailored. He directed with passion and vision. He could make actors weep during note sessions with his insights. He could make them laugh with his wit. He had genuine theatrical instincts when he bothered to use them. But he also had cruelty. She saw it immediately. The way he mocked the older actors who couldn't remember lines as quickly as they once could. The way he screamed at the costume designer when colors weren't exactly right. The way he blamed stage crew for his own mistakes. The way he took credit for other people's ideas and made them think it was normal. The way he manipulated people using his father's connections and money and power. And she listened. Because she was invisible, and people said everything in front of invisible people. One afternoon in March 1971, she'd record later it was March 18th, a Thursday, around 2:45 p.m. She was in the coat check room organizing the storage closet where they kept lost items and spare hangers. Fletcher and a friend of his, another Yale graduate named Preston Vanderbilt, came into the room, thinking it was empty. They were laughing, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes. Fletcher was telling a story. "So I'm failing directing 301, right? Professor Markham says I have no instinct for the craft. Tells me I should consider going into arts administration instead of directing. Can you believe that? Me, with no instinct? I'm furious. So I call Dad. I say, 'Dad, this professor is failing me because he's jealous of my talent.' Dad makes one phone call. One phone call. To the dean. Next week, I've got an A in the class, and Professor Markham is writing me recommendation letters for my MFA thesis. That's how the world works, Preston. Merit is for people who don't have connections. The rest of us just make phone calls." Dorothea, hidden in the storage closet, wrote it down in her ever-present pocket notebook. Date, time, quote, context. And that became her pattern for the next 18 months. Fletcher would have conversations, thinking he was alone or thinking the coat check lady didn't matter. And she would listen and document and remember. In June 1972, The conversation with Montgomery Stapleton about plagiarizing quote 93 __. In September 1972, the phone call to Celestine Blackwood threatening her about the pregnancy. In between, dozens of smaller revelations, admissions of stealing concepts from other directors, embezzling theater funds for personal use, blackmailing a board member who'd had an affair, manipulating reviews by whining and dining critics with his father's money, taking kickbacks from designers and technicians. All documented, all remembered, all waiting. And then came October 14th, 1972, the night Fletcher Beaumont Ashford made his catastrophic mistake, the night he publicly humiliated Dorothea, called her an, quote, 94, mocked her as, quote, 95, made her the butt of his cruel joke in front of the entire company. The night no one defended her. The night she walked home alone through cold Philadelphia streets and decided that 30 years of invisibility had given her exactly what she needed: power. When Dorothea arrived at her apartment that night, she didn't prepare dinner. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't go to bed. Instead, she pulled her locked trunk from under the Murphy bed, opened it with the key she kept hidden in a coffee can, and pulled out 30 years of notebooks. Dozens of them, hundreds of pages, thousands of observations. She found Fletcher Beaumont Ashford's entries. She'd started a separate index in 1971 when he arrived, knowing instinctively that he was someone worth watching. She compiled everything, organized it chronologically, created a timeline of his misdeeds spanning 19 months. March 1971. Admission to Yale drama obtained through father's influence, possibly bribery. April 1971. Failed directing course. Grade changed after father intervened with dean. September 1971. Embezzled $800 from production budget for quote 96 disguised as payments to fictional suppliers. January 1972. Blackmailed board member Edgar Whitfield. Threatened to expose affair with box office manager unless Whitfield supported his appointment as associate director. June 1972. Purchased plagiarized concept for quote 97 from Montgomery Stapleton for $3,000. September 1972. Threatened mistress Celestine Blackwood regarding pregnancy, demanded abortion. October 1972. Embezzled additional $6,500 from various production budgets, all documented. All with dates, times, witnesses, quotes. She sat at her desk and began writing letters. Not emotional letters full of rage or vengeance. Clinical letters. Factual letters. Letters with specific details that could be verified. The first letter was to the Philadelphia Inquirer, attention arts editor. She typed it on a library typewriter the next day, October 15th, 1972. Anonymous. No return address. Factual. Detailed. Quote 98 __. She mailed it October 20th, 1972, from a random mailbox far from her apartment. The Inquirer received it, and their arts editor, a sharp man named William Pemberton who took theater seriously, decided to investigate. He called Montgomery Stapleton in New York. At first, Montgomery denied everything. He'd been paid to keep quiet after all. But when Pemberton mentioned the specific date, time, location, and amount, Montgomery panicked. How could anyone know those details unless they'd been there? In his panic, he confessed everything. The article ran November 3rd, 1972, front page of the arts section. Quote 99 __. It detailed the entire scandal: Fletcher's purchase of the concept, Montgomery's confession, the questions about artistic integrity. It quoted theater ethics experts calling it, quote, 100, quote, and, quote, 101, quote, Fletcher Beaumont. Ashford held a press conference the next day, denying everything, calling it, quote, 102, quote, claiming Montgomery was unstable and trying to extort money. But the damage was done. The theater community was talking. The board of directors was concerned. Patrons were asking questions. Dorothea watched it all unfold from her coat check station. Invisible as always. She checked coats, gave out tags, said nothing. On November 15, 1972, she mailed the second letter. This one went to the Pennsylvania Bar Association, Attention Ethics Committee. Typed, anonymous, factual. Quote 103. The Bar Association took anonymous complaints seriously. They had to, given how many legitimate whistleblowers feared retaliation. They contacted Yale. Yale initially resisted, citing privacy concerns. But when the Bar Association began a formal investigation, Yale was forced to cooperate. The investigation took 3 weeks. What they found was damning. Fletcher's admission file contained irregularities. His entrance exam scores were in the bottom quartile. His audition reviews were mediocre. But he'd been admitted anyway, after Beaumont Sterling Ashford had made a substantial quote 104 to Yale's general fund. $50,000, specifically earmarked for the drama school. Furthermore, they found evidence that Beaumont had contacted the dean personally regarding Fletcher's failing grade in directing 301. Email records showed the dean had then pressured Professor Markham to change the grade. Yale claimed this was quote 105 but it looked bad. The Bar Association couldn't prove bribery. Technically, donations to universities aren't illegal. But they did find that Beaumont had failed to disclose these communications on his annual ethics statements, which was a violation of bar rules. He received an official reprimand in December 1972. The story made local news, not front page, but page 3 of the Metro section. Fletcher Beaumont's reputation took another hit. His father, humiliated and furious, blamed Fletcher for the scandal. Their relationship, already strained, fractured. Beaumont cut off Fletcher's allowance. Until now, Fletcher had been receiving monthly checks from his father to supplement his theater salary. Suddenly, Fletcher was living on just his theater income. But Dorothea wasn't finished. On December 10, 1972, she mailed the third letter. This one went to Margaret Ashford, Fletcher's wife, at their townhouse on Delancey Street. She'd looked up the address in the phone book. Hand-delivered by messenger service to avoid postal records. Typed, anonymous. Dear Mrs. Ashford, I am writing to inform you of facts you deserve to know about your husband's conduct. Fletcher Ashford has been carrying on an affair with Celestine Blackwood, costume designer at the Whitfield Theater, for approximately 8 months. In September 1972, Miss Blackwood became pregnant. On September 18, 1972, at approximately 10:47 p.m., I overheard your husband on the telephone with Miss Blackwood. He told her, quote, "I'm not leaving Margaret. She's the daughter of a federal judge. Get rid of it or I'll destroy you. I have lawyers, money, connections. You have nothing." He then threatened her into having an abortion. I am providing this information because I believe you deserve to know the truth about the man you married. I suggest you hire a private investigator to verify these facts. Miss Blackwood works at the Whitfield Theater and can be contacted there. Sincerely, a friend. Margaret received the letter on December 11, 1972. At first, she didn't believe it. Fletcher had always been charming to her, attentive, romantic. But the letter was so specific, so detailed. The date, the time, the exact quotes. She couldn't ignore it. She hired a private investigator, a man named Robert Chen who specialized in marital infidelity cases. It took him 3 days to confirm everything. He interviewed Celestine Blackwood, who, bitter about the abortion Fletcher had forced her to have, furious about being threatened and discarded, told him everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the threats, even the abortion clinic's name and date. Margaret confronted Fletcher on December 15, 1972. They had a massive fight. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, things being thrown. Fletcher denied it at first, then admitted the affair but claimed Celestine was lying about the pregnancy. then finally admitted everything and begged Margaret to forgive him. She filed for divorce on January 3, 1973. Divorce in 1973 was still scandalous, especially among Philadelphia's upper class. The proceedings became public record. The newspapers reported it. Theater director's marriage ends in scandal. Margaret's father, federal judge Harrison Whitmore, was humiliated. He'd liked Fletcher, had pulled strings to help his career, had introduced him to powerful people. Now he felt betrayed. He publicly disowned Fletcher, refused to take his phone calls, told friends he'd been, quote, 109. By February 1973, Fletcher Beaumont Ashford's world was collapsing. His artistic reputation was destroyed by the plagiarism scandal. His father had cut him off financially and was facing professional embarrassment. His wife was divorcing him. His father-in-law, a federal judge with extensive connections, actively hated him. The board of directors at the Whitfield was pressuring him to resign. But Dorothea Millicent Hargrove had one more letter to send. On March 5, 1973, she mailed it to the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigations Division, Philadelphia office. Typed, anonymous, detailed. Dear IRS, I am writing to report tax evasion by Fletcher Beaumont Ashford, currently residing at address provided. Mr. Ashford has been systematically embezzling funds from the Whitfield Repertory Theater for personal use. Between September 1971 and October 1972, he embezzled approximately $15,000 through fake invoices for non-existent suppliers, kickbacks from vendors, and unauthorized expenses. None of this income was reported on his tax returns. I have documentation showing discrepancies in theater financial records that can be verified through audit. The theater's accountant, Mr. Harold Finchley, can provide these records. Please investigate. Sincerely, a taxpayer. The IRS took tax evasion very seriously, especially after Watergate made government corruption a hot topic. They opened an investigation immediately. They subpoenaed Whitfield's financial records. They interviewed Harold Finchley, the theater's nervous accountant who'd been quietly worried about irregularities but too scared to report them. What they found was damning. Fletcher had been stealing, just not as much as Dorothea's letter claimed. The actual amount was closer to $8,000, not $15,000. But $8,000 unreported dollars was still serious tax evasion. They charged him in May 1973. The case dragged through the courts. Fletcher hired expensive lawyers he couldn't afford, going into debt. In November 1973, facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to reduced charges. He paid substantial fines, $20,000, which he had to borrow from relatives. He avoided jail time but received 3 years probation. By December 1973, Fletcher Beaumont Ashford was financially ruined, professionally destroyed, socially ostracized. The Whitfield board formally fired him. No theater in Philadelphia would hire him. The scandals had made him toxic. He tried New York, but the theater community there had heard about the plagiarism. He tried Boston, Chicago, nothing. He left Philadelphia in January 1974, moved to Pittsburgh, tried to get work directing at small community theaters. They wouldn't hire him. Even community theaters had heard his name. He moved to Baltimore. Same result. Finally, he ended up in Reading, Pennsylvania, a small city 40 miles from Philadelphia, just far enough that people didn't know his whole story, just close enough that he couldn't truly escape his past. He got a job teaching drama at Reading Community College, part-time, $9,000 a year, teaching acting basics to bored teenagers whose parents forced them to take the class and retirees who wanted something to do. From promising director at a major regional theater to part-time community college instructor in 18 months. From $15,000 a year plus his father's allowance to $9,000 a year with no benefits. All because he'd underestimated an invisible coat check lady. And Dorothea Millicent Hargrove continued working at the Whitfield Repertory Theater. Every day at her familiar station, taking coats, giving tags, checking them back out. Invisible as always, as if nothing had happened. But she knew she'd done it. Single-handedly, systematically, patiently, she'd destroyed Fletcher Beaumont Ashford's life. Not out of rage. She'd felt no rage that night in October 1972, just cold clarity. Not out of revenge. Revenge implies passion, and she'd felt no passion. Out of justice. Fletcher Beaumont Ashford was a liar, a thief, a plagiarist, a manipulator, an abuser. He'd hurt people for years with impunity because of his father's money and connections. Someone needed to stop him. So she did. The theater never knew it was her. No one suspected the quiet coat check lady. Why would they? She was invisible. She'd always been invisible. In the years that followed, word spread mysteriously through the Philadelphia theater community. Not explicit warning. No one knew what had actually happened, but a vague sense that the Whitfield had its own form of justice, that bad behavior had consequences there even when it didn't elsewhere. Young directors coming to the Whitfield were careful, polite, respectful to everyone, even the janitors and ushers. No one quite knew why, but everyone felt it was wise. In 1978, Constance Fairchild, one of the actors who'd stood silently that night in 1972 when Fletcher humiliated Dorothea, became the theater's associate director. One afternoon, she came to the coat check room. Quote, 111, quote, she said, quote, 112, quote, 113, quote. Constance hesitated, then said, quote, 114, quote. Dorothea looked at her calmly, quote, 115, quote, 116, quote, Constance said firmly. She paused. Dorothea smiled slightly. Constance studied her face, sensing something deeper, but she didn't ask further. She simply thanked her and left. The years continued. The 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. Dorothea remained, still working, still invisible, still watching. In 1987, she received a letter from Reading, Pennsylvania. Inside, a secretary wrote, Fletcher Beaumont Ashford drinks heavily, lives alone, has no one. Yesterday, she heard him crying in his office, saying over and over, I don't understand how it all fell apart. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone destroyed me, but I don't know who. Dorothea read it 3 times. Felt nothing. Just quiet certainty that justice had been done. Fletcher died in 1994 at age 51. Cirrhosis of the liver. Found alone in his apartment. No funeral. Just a small notice. Ashford Fletcher B., 51, former theater director, deceased. No services planned. When Dorothea learned of his death, she simply nodded, then went back to work. In October 2002, Dorothea finally retired at 79. The theater organized a farewell ceremony. The artistic director spoke. She's the living memory of this institution, the keeper of our theater's soul. The audience gave her a standing ovation. She cried for the first time in 60 years. A young actress asked her, Does justice exist? Dorothea smiled. Justice exists, not always quickly, but it exists. The key is patience and memory. She died in March 2007 at age 84. Her headstone reads, Hargrove, Dorothea Millicent, 1923 to 2007. Coat check attendant, Whitfield Repertory Theater. 60 years of service. She remembered everything. In the theater's coat check room hangs her photograph. Below it, a plaque. __, quote _ 126 __. Every newcomer hears her story. The coat check lady who was invisible for 30 years, then became the most visible person in the theater. How one humiliation led to justice. How invisible people see everything. And remember. And sometimes act. Quote, 127 quote, The old actors say, quote, 128 quote, and the young directors listen and look at her photograph and understand invisibility isn't weakness, it's power, because invisible people see the truth, and truth always wins. Always. Epilogue. Reading, Pennsylvania Community College Theater, August 1987. Fletcher Beaumont Ashford, age 44, sits alone in an empty auditorium. He's just finished teaching 5 people, 3 elderly women and 2 sullen teenagers. He stares out the window at Reading. Small, quiet, provincial. Far from Philadelphia. Far from glory. He remembers October 1972, that evening when he called Dorothea Hargrove an ancient bat. How he laughed. How she handed him his coat. He didn't know then that she'd heard everything, knew everything, remembered everything. He didn't know that invisible people are the most dangerous. Now he knows. But it's too late. Fletcher stands, puts on his threadbare overcoat, the same one from 15 years ago, walks out into Reading's indifferent streets. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, at the Whitfield Repertory Theater, a streetcar named Desire is underway. Director, Constance Fairchild. The house is packed. After the show, ovations, flowers, triumph. In the coat check room stands Dorothea Hargrove, 64 years old, handing coats to actors, smiling calmly, wisely. Invisible, as always. But she sees everything, remembers everything, knows everything. And when a young actor takes his coat and says casually, "Thanks, Grandma," without looking at her, "Do." And somewhere in a locked trunk on Pine Street, 30 notebooks wait silently, remembering everything.